right, welcome to the Young Turks. Cenk and Anna with you guys. Today is a theme, misconceptions. We're gonna straighten out a ton of misconceptions that the Democratic Party has, certainly the media has. CNN is in a world of trouble. Their leader is in a world of trouble. We're gonna break that down like you won't believe, and we're gonna give you the
like you'll never believe it.
You wouldn't believe it. I don't know why you'd watch it if you won't believe it. Anyways, seriously, guys, we're gonna give you a perspective on that you definitely, literally will not see anywhere else. And I think obviously it's the right perspective, and it answers the unanswerable questions. So stay right here for that. Casper.
Well, we begin with some of the aftermath from the debt ceiling negotiations and Biden signing that legislation into law. So let's get into it.
In the world of policy and of families and of people going to work, there was nothing in that bill that was very good for anybody in America.
Democratic Senator Sheldon Whitehouse confessed that the debt ceiling bill that Biden signed into law did nothing to improve the lives of ordinary Americans. In fact, it was pretty negative for ordinary people. However, as we've shared with you before in the past, in regard to this whole negotiation, Sheldon Whitehouse agrees that this was actually a great move for the Biden administration, which makes little to no sense to me, but why don't we hear him out?
Democrats would appear to be operating from a place of strength right now. How do you expect that to impact priorities across both chambers going into the upcoming election year?
Well, I think if you look at the quiet signing ceremony that Joe Biden had, he did not take a big victory lap. I think he understands that in the cage match of Washington, D.C. politics, he gave the Republicans one heck of a thrashing. But in the world of policy and of families and of people going to work, there was nothing in that bill that was very good for anybody in America. But what he did do was he teed us up for 2024 quite well by showing that the Republicans were extremists, by putting the entire House Republican caucus on record, voting for a bill that would cost 700,000 jobs and provoke a recession, and being unwilling to change one crooked tax loophole in the tax code.
What? So if you look at who actually voted in favor of the legislation, you had a ton of Democrats who voted in favor of the legislation. How exactly is this debt ceiling bill going to bode well for the Democratic Party, considering how many of them voted? And I'll give you the numbers in just a moment. But one other thing I want to just quickly mention, he's likely referring to the extreme bill that the House GOP had voted on, and he's hanging his hat on that, arguing that that is precisely what the American people are gonna look at and judge Republicans by. Except most Americans don't know about that bill that House Republicans voted for. They have no idea. And when they look at this, the bill that actually passed and Biden signed into law, they'll see that there's a ton of Democrats who voted in favor of it. In fact, I'm gonna go to a quote from House Speaker Kevin McCarthy, a Republican, after the passage of the bill, after Democrats signed onto it. House Speaker Kevin McCarthy could barely hold back his glee with reporters. He said, quote, "I think it's wonderful that Democrats voted for it because they are now on record," McCarthy said. "Let's get the rest of the IRS agents. Let's get the rest of the work requirements. Let's cut more because we are in a big debt."
Yeah, so I used to get frustrated with Democrats, but I've basically given up. I think they're hopeless. And that's a perfect example of it. Guys, you saw it with your own eyes. He says, it won't help one American, and it was a big win for us Democrats. Well, there's something very wrong with that sentence. So let's break it up. So there's first part that's wrong is obvious, which is we don't really care what helps you. We care what helps us. So we thrashed the Republicans in Washington, D.C., and Biden did a great job for the Democratic Party. By the way, that's not true. That's the second part I'm gonna get to, okay? But great job for us. Oh, you guys got screwed, but I'm celebrating here. I'm celebrating, okay? So that's problem number one. Not a good look to say the least. Number two, he's wrong. It's not a win for the Democrats, and they didn't thrash the Republicans. No, the Republicans kicked their ass. They didn't have to negotiate anything. They didn't have to give up anything. Biden wanted to give those things up. And by the way, now that he has cut defense and all the things that Kevin McCarthy said in his glee were unfortunately correct, now they're gonna say, okay, you own it. Nobody's going to remember. Anna's 100% right. Nobody's going to remember the bill that didn't pass, that Republicans voted on in the House, and the Democrats aren't going to run their campaigns on one stupid proposal. They're not even going to mention it ever again in their lives.
100%.
Right? So all they're going to remember is Biden's the president, and Biden passed a bill that cut spending, that cut benefits, that cut from the average American, and that even Democrats agree doesn't help a single American citizen. What a terrible, stupid, dumb idea. But that is very standard for the Democratic Party, not the voters. The voters are screwed beyond recognition, right? But the Democratic Party leadership and their politicians are the worst of the worst. The only people I can imagine being worse are Republicans and conservatives. Why? The Republicans are laughing their ass off. We got to screw the American people and put it on the Democrats. So it was their intent and they wanted to do it. The guy who wrote an article about this in the first place that drew attention is also a conservative writer. So conservatives are now gloating, like, ha ha, we got you to do all of our dirty work, you idiot Joe Biden. Now we're gonna blame you for the thing we came up with. So, I mean, it's a parade of horribles. They're just, everyone involved in Washington is disgusting.
I know, Cenk, but did you consider the fact that Democrats are operating from a place of strength?
A place of strength. Okay. No, place of strength is 14th Amendment. I'm done with it. I dare you to try to ruin the debt ceiling and crash the stock market and watch your donors absolutely eviscerate you. I dare you. That's a place of strength. Yeah, I gave them most of what they wanted, but I didn't give them all they wanted, and we screwed the average American. It just didn't work out for us. Not a place of strength. And by the way, the thing that particularly disgusts me about this is Sheldon Whitehouse is a smart guy, and on other issues he can be pretty effective. But the Washington virus will rot anyone's brain, even a smart guy like Sheldon Whitehouse's, okay? Total brain rot, like losing is winning. Is it? Is it? No, you guys are all in an alternate reality, and I'm just telling the audience, because you can't tell them. They have brain rot, they won't listen, they're in a cult.
Sheldon Whitehouse might be smart, he might even be a good dude, but he runs with a bunch of bad dudes.
He does. Okay. I don't know if Corn Pop's among them.
All right, so let's break down the numbers real quick, because if you look at who voted for the debt ceiling bill, which did nothing to raise taxes on the rich, which did nothing to cut spending or even freeze spending on defense, but certainly did implement work requirements for the poor, certainly did implement spending cuts, they call it a spending cap, but with inflation, spending cuts on social spending programs that help ordinary Americans. I mean, Democrats should not have voted for this, but they did. So in the House, the final tally was 314 to 117, and it would suggest rather easy passage in the upcoming vote in the Senate. This was written by the Washington Post before the bill passed in the Senate.
And it was incredibly easy in the Senate, of course.
Yep, and I'll get to that right now. The legislation passed the Senate by a vote of 63 to 36. They didn't have to worry about the legislative filibuster there.
Can I just say one thing about those numbers?
Sure.
The uniparty's back. Corporate Democrats and Republicans.
It's always been there.
Yeah,
it's always been there.
Yeah, that's right. And so that's the essence of Congress. That's the 2/3 of Congress that is irrevocably corrupt. The rest of it has a lot of corruption too. But that 2/3 center is what the media celebrates bipartisanship, because it's corporate rule defined. And there is, in economic issues between the corporate Democrats and corporate Republicans, as we've told you 100 times, and this proves clearly, there is no difference at all. They both gladly walked right into this and did something that they didn't need to do at all, and it's in the numbers, indisputable.
In fact, let's stay at the Senate numbers, because if you take a look at who voted in favor of the legislation in the Senate, you'll see a pretty significant majority of Democrats voted in favor. In fact, more Democrats than Republicans voted in favor of the bill.
That's also, by the way, true in the House, led by the Republicans. So Joe Biden's the president, he owns it, as we talked about before. And now more Democrats voted for this garbage of a bill that helps the rich, that helps defense contractors, hurts the average American. More Democrats voted for it than Republicans. You can't be a better sucker. Okay, so that means, and we've told you 100 times, they're not suckers, they're paid to lose.
So this is also incredibly depressing, although given the recent history with the Progressive Caucus, I guess unsurprising. So 66% of Congressional Progressive Caucus members voted for the deal, including
Progressive Caucus,
including Representative Ilhan Omar. Are you aware of that?
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
So yeah, who cares? Ilhan Omar's not my cousin. It's a terrible vote, and it was a disastrous, ill-advised, awful vote. Who cares? Why would I care that Ilhan Omar voted for it? So, and by the way, the ones that voted against it, I'll be honest with you, I'll go further. Tons of them voted against it because they were released from the vote.
Well, in fact, why don't we give you an excerpt from one of David Dayen's recent pieces on this issue? And his argument is that this is not going to bode well for Democrats. And here's what he writes. What has Representative Pramila Jayapal, remember she's the head of the Progressive Caucus, concerned is that so many Democrats affirmed the agreement. Quote, our strategy was to not give them one vote more than what they needed to pass, Jayapal told the American Prospect in an interview last Friday, with enough of a strong no vote to make clear that it was not a good deal. Pramila, the only thing that matters is if the bill passes.
Yeah, and
that's all that matters. That's it. That's all that matters. Okay, all these like cute little games that they're playing mean nothing to the ordinary voter.
It's worse than that, Anna. She just told on herself.
Yeah, she did.
She just said we would have voted for the deal if they needed the votes. But we did a show vote, a fake vote, voting against the deal because they didn't need the votes. But trust me that we would have sold out given the opportunity and the need for it. The worst leader ever, like makes Joe Biden look strong. So this is not the leader of the Progressive Caucus, but to be honest, with 2/3 of the so-called Progressive Caucus voting for this junk corporate awful deal, it's not really a Progressive Caucus. But everything in Washington is fake. All of it is fake, all of it is theater. And so of course they screwed you. That's their job. And then the media rushes in with pom-poms going, yay, what a great deal. You guys got screwed again. Our corporate bosses are so happy. So they're giving pats on the head to all the corporate Republicans and Democrats. This is the uniparty absolutely screwing you. We've shown you 100 times now what's in the deal. What's in the deal hurts you in every imaginable way. And thank you, Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, for admitting that. You weren't supposed to admit that, but you slipped up and went, oh yeah, this doesn't help any American at all. Wait, did I say that out loud? Yes, you did. We were right all along.
All right, now we direct our ire toward Republicans, beginning with Ron DeSantis.
What does it say that Donald Trump is not here?
I'm just happy to be here. I love the people here. I think this is a great event, and there's a lot of friends now that we've developed, but we'll make a lot more friends, and so that's what it's all about.
There's nothing more amusing than watching Florida Governor Ron DeSantis try to skirt any question having to do with Donald Trump. That's a good example of it. He gave an answer while walking as quickly as he can away from the MSNBC reporter asking him that question. But what was also interesting was that during this past weekend, he was asked by another reporter to opine on Donald Trump's statements in favor of North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un, and he was a little more salty in that response. Let's watch.
What'd you make of Trump congratulating Kim Jong-un?
I was surprised to see that. I mean, I think one, Kim Jong-un is a murderous dictator. They just imprisoned for life a family, including an infant, which is just outrageous. And then the World Health Organization's a bankrupt organization, like Kim Jong-un's bad, but then joining that, we need to be getting out of that and rejecting the WHO lockdown treaty and not congratulating about being involved in the WHO.
Do you think Trump has the temperament?
So I think that was actually a good answer. And if you're wondering what he's referring to when it comes to the World Health Organization, so the news is that North Korea has been admitted to the World Health Organization's executive board. And so that's what he's speaking out about. Trump actually decided to congratulate Kim Jong-un on that. And he did so in the form of a truth social post. Congratulations to Kim Jong-un, his best friend that writes love letters to him, of course.
Yeah. So look, here's the deal. Politicians don't want to answer questions that are uncomfortable for them, so they're usually slimy in how they avoid it. So obviously he answered the Kim Jong-un one because he thought it was helpful to him. And that one's a layup because everyone who isn't mentally unbalanced knows that Kim Jong-un's a dictator, a communist dictator. It's not really communist, but theoretically communist and communist in name, right? And brutal concentration camps, murders, ad nauseum, right? And one of the most unstable and developed nukes under Trump's watch. That's an easy one to target because, like, what is Trump doing? I mean, I don't even think MAGA's like, oh yeah, communist dictator. I mean, if he can get MAGA to treat, applaud a communist dictator, then I got to hats off to him. Biggest, most successful cult in world history.
I mean, right? It is miraculous. Like, it is shocking how he can convince his supporters to support things that historically they've been pretty aggressively against. And in fact, just to go back to your point about, like, you don't know how he does it, how many MAGA voters support this ideology or this take on Kim Jong-un. Let's bring that truth back up, that truth post back up, because if you look at it, at the time that we grabbed that screenshot, more than 6,000 people liked it.
Like, oh yeah, let's go communist dictators. Let's go. By the way, there's no freedom in North Korea.
No.
None. You cannot ever say anything against the dictator. You can't do what you want in life. You can't, every part of your life is controlled by a literal tyrannical government. It's the exact opposite of what MAGA claims, but the minute the cult leader says it, okay? So I'm curious, I don't know if it'll become a big issue, but if it becomes a big issue, do more Republicans side with DeSantis or Trump on this? And usually they've shut off their minds, so whatever a cult leader says, we are now in favor of communist dictators, we now hate freedom, maybe. It's an open question. But anyway, as far as politics goes, it's an easy layup for DeSantis to hit him on that. But I will say this, DeSantis is wrong about one thing, the World Health Organization. They are wildly imperfect, they've gotten many things wrong, okay? But what are we gonna do, not have a World Health Organization? So then when there's pandemics and epidemics that affect all of humanity, we're like, nah, we're not gonna coordinate. That's insane. And that's a typical insane reaction that the right wing has.
So I wanna go back to Trump's statements about Kim Jong-un, because after he received some backlash from other GOP candidates, by the way, it wasn't just Ron DeSantis who said what he said there. Nikki Haley also condemned Trump's statements. A Trump campaign spokesperson came out to, of course, defend Donald Trump, and get a load of this. He said this: President Trump achieved peace through strength. And I mean, peace through strength. He talked about how he fell in love with Kim Jong-un. We fell in love. He is on tape saying that. He talked about how they write love letters to each other, literally.
You can look it up, guys. It's literal. And since it comes from the mouth of the cult leader, you should believe it, right? Because we didn't say it. You could see on tape him saying it. And by the way, strength, he developed nukes under Trump's watch.
That's right.
That's actually the definition of weakness.
So he continues to say in this statement, as a result, no new wars were started under his presidency.
That's because you didn't push back at all. I mean, they're good, I'm glad, I don't want wars. But I mean, you didn't push back against his nukes 1%.
Right, I mean, Trump brought us to the brink of war with North Korea with his social media posts.
And then gave up and said, oh, never mind, they developed the nukes.
And then he took a trip to North Korea, they hung out, they started sending each other love letters.
Holding hands.
Okay, so that's peace through strength? Okay, all right. On the other hand, Ron DeSantis is a puppet of the establishment warmongers and doesn't have the strength, fortitude, or will to stand up against America's adversaries. In Iowa, there were far better candidates than DeSantis who didn't come across as an awkward and wooden swamp-like knockoff of Jeb Bush.
That part is correct.
Yeah, that's pretty funny. So I appreciated that very last sentence, but that was about it.
We're the fairest show in America. We just say, like, if advantage Trump, we'll say advantage Trump. Advantage DeSantis, we'll say it, right? But look, the more we do these segments, the more, unfortunately, I become convinced that they can't beat Trump, because I'm picturing a MAGA guy listening to us, and he's getting triggered left and right every time we insult Trump, right? And then that insult of Trump is then put onto DeSantis. And you cannot criticize, like, it's like an apostle criticizing the Messiah. It's not gonna work. You're just gonna be considered a Judas, right? They're not gonna knock off their prophet. So, God damn it, unless something like terrible, unexpected, actually in jail with handcuffs, It's
no, even that.
Even then.
But Cenk,
Trump
listen,
is big time favorite on the Republican side.
I think part of the issue with the left, especially when Trump was president, was just this hyper focus on trying to persuade hardcore fanatics of Trump that he's a bad guy. I think the only thing you can do on the left is fight to ensure that you have a good candidate. And we're not doing that. Well, and when I say we, I don't mean here at TYT. I mean the Democratic Party as a whole has decided that no, obviously Joe Biden needs to not only run for re-election, but win re-election. And we're not having a conversation about any other primary candidates at all. We're not gonna have any debates. That is an issue because you can't control the other side, but you can strategize when it comes to your own side. And there's very little of that happening, if any at all.
Yeah, well, that's definitely true. But to be fair, nobody's running, so that's our fault. I mean, Jesus, Biden is the worst candidate. He's sitting at 35%. He's a sitting duck. Trump's almost definitely going to win the Republican side, which means he's almost definitely going to win the presidency again if nothing changes. That's a giant if, right? But right now, nothing's changing. And Biden can't win. He's at 35%. He's 15 points lower than when he was in the last contest, and he almost lost the last contest in the swing states. We are, right as things stand, we are in massive trouble.
We're gonna take a break. When we come back, we have an update on someone who might enter the presidential race as a third party candidate, and that's Senator Joe Manchin. That and more coming up after the break.
All right, back on TYT, Cenk, Anna, and Marcy Dryden West. Marcy just joined. We appreciate you, Marcy. You could do likewise by hitting the join button below the video on YouTube. And everybody else, tyt.com/join. We appreciate your help. You make us stronger. Anna.
Well, Manchin has some news for us, so why don't we get to that story?
I always ask you, you have not ruled it off and taken it off the table. Is a third party run still in the realm of possibilities?
Shannon, No Labels has been moving and pushing very hard of the centrist middle, making common sense decisions.
Conservative Democratic Senator Joe Manchin would not rule out a possible presidential run in 2024 as a third party candidate. And behind the scenes, a group that we have talked about on the show before, known as No Labels, has been eyeing Manchin as their possible choice for a so-called centrist candidate to run against Biden and Trump. Now, we'll remind you of exactly who funds the organization No Labels, what their real agenda is, but first, here's a little more from Joe Manchin's evasive, chaotic, and awful answer.
No Labels has been moving and pushing very hard of the centrist middle, making common sense decisions. People that basically expect us to do our job and not put the political party ahead of the policy in our great country. That's what we've seen happening, and there's more noise and more extremism coming from the far left and far right. They've been pushing this middle. If the middle's pushed what we just saw happen, that was the middle pushing. So that's basically a movement where No Labels has been proposing for a long time, 10, 11, 12 years.
It sounds a lot like what Joe Manchin
basically has the voice. It's always what I believe. I believe that basically that's where you make the decisions. You listen to the left and the right. You make sure you leave nobody behind, and you listen to the different persuasions that they might have and concerns. But when it comes, you've got to make common sense.
I love that he's pretending like he has any concern for what the left has to say about policy-related issues. Because the fact of the matter is, No Labels is a pro-corporate organization that is essentially threatening Joe Biden with a potential third-party ticket in order to get him to bow his head because they don't think that he's been pro-corporate enough. That is what's really going on here. Now, Harlan Crow, the guy who's been giving all sorts of lavish gifts to Supreme Court Justice Thomas Clarence, is one of the big backers and funders for No Labels. And this next video will also shed some light on the other individuals who are funding this effort.
Coca-Cola
Motorola, General Electric, pharma giant Johnson & Johnson, and oil and gas company Pioneer Natural Resources have all made 5-figure donations to No Labels over the years. So has the Consumer Technology Association, whose members as of 2020 included Amazon, AT&T, Google, Humana, Nvidia, Verizon, Walmart, and others. Private equity firms, you know, the people gutting hospitals, nursing homes, and driving up your rent, love Kirsten Sinema. And it turns out they're big fans of No Labels too. Puck News recently revealed that Steven Schwartzman, the billionaire CEO of private equity giant Blackstone, is a major donor to the group.
So Cenk, I mean, I've heard from many people that money in politics doesn't make any difference at all. That these kinds of organizations don't really have any sway over the decisions that politicians make. In this case, it would be Joe Biden. What do you think?
Yeah, well, of course, that's a joke. So look, right after they voted against minimum wage, Kristen Sinema and Joe Manchin went and picked up checks from the National Restaurant Association, the top group lobbying against a higher minimum wage. They're rubbing it in our face. Joe Manchin has gotten millions of dollars from fossil fuel companies. He has his own fossil fuel company. He makes money through the campaign contributions and the power associated with that, fame, etc. He makes money directly. Everything is about corruption. And so the part, as usual, the folks that I'm most mad at are the media. Why? Because Manchin is an extremist in supporting corporate positions that are deeply unpopular with the American people. That's not my opinion, it's the facts based on the polling of Americans. Take Manchin's positions and you look at where it stands in the polling and it is a disaster. Almost no one agrees with him. And what does all of mainstream media call him all the time? What's the #1 word? Moderate. Well, how could it be moderate if he's representing an extreme position? Because in the Washington world, corporate media world, since they're all owned by corporations and serve corporations, they do this amazing, and you gotta hand it to them, brilliant trick of just co-opting, kidnapping the word moderate. There's actually nothing wrong with being a moderate overall. I'm a progressive and you've seen me fight quote unquote moderates my whole life, my whole career. Because I'm not fighting actual moderates. Actual moderates care about balancing of interests on policy positions and are generally at the center of the country. That's not a bad thing in a democracy. But what Washington calls a moderate is a corporate extremist who gives away the store. So now let's talk real quick about no label strategy. There's only 3 possibilities here. One is they live in an alternate reality and they think Joe Manchin might be able to pull it off, and then they got perfect corporate rule. He will do everything that they ask for. He's 100% owned by these donors, okay? And they might think, hey, Biden's so weak, Trump is so weak, maybe he could do it. Now, I've seen the polling, there's a 0% chance, but everybody's got brain rot and everybody lives in their own alternate reality, okay? But a second possibility, with the most logical one, the one that Anna pointed out, they're just trying to pressure Biden, which doesn't take much. Biden just needs an excuse because he largely agrees with them to give them more things before he loses, and they all know he's gonna lose, okay? And the third thing is, well, just in case he's not gonna lose, there's an insurance policy to make sure Trump wins. Because if you're on the third party, guys, MAGA is not going to all of a sudden go, oh, maybe I should vote for a Democrat like Joe Manchin.
No way.
There's a 0%, he'll pick up 0 MAGA votes. And 93% of Republicans voted for Trump in 2020. They're all MAGA, okay? So he's not gonna pick up a single Republican vote. It's gonna take just votes away from MSNBC viewers who are like, yeah, moderate Democrats are the greatest. Corporate rule is awesome. So it's like, look, I get mad at Cornel West for running, he announced today in this terrible so-called party that was run by terrible people. And he's gonna take away votes from the Democratic, he's not gonna take a single vote from a Republican. Every third party guy, including Joe Manchin, every one of them knows they're not gonna take a single vote from Trump, okay? So this is all an effort to make sure Trump gets elected.
That's exactly right. Now, I want to show you a vomitous video I had covered this about a week ago, 2 weeks ago maybe, and it features two of the prominent individuals who are running this no labels organization, Joe Lieberman and Pat McCrory. And they were asked, like, what's the plan here? What are you guys really trying to do? Get a load of this.
I think that part of what we've done is because we've actually begun to do this, and the two parties, particularly the Democratic Party, seems most anxious, nervous about what we're doing because we're challenging the political status quo.
Listen, I know the game. I've played the game. I've been a part of the game. I've been played by the game. And the fact of the matter is the game wants to keep the status quo. They want to keep the power, regardless of the pragmatic circumstances on the ground. And we're challenging the status quo, and maybe by even challenging the status quo between now and Super Tuesday, we can have an impact on the two parties.
Don't you just love it when corporatists co-opt anti-corporatist rhetoric and use it for their own purposes?
No, I mean, they're textbook.
It's amazing.
They're textbook. There was a hilarious video. In my lifetime, there's no one who's wanted to protect the status quo more than Joe Lieberman and Joe Manchin. So they, like, one of them is named Status, the other one is named Quo. Okay, now these jokers, understanding that the country hates the establishment and hates the status quo, come in with, like this guy, we are never against status quo. We're against it. Are you, you freaking joker? Okay, one of the most corrupt men ever to be in politics. So the idea that these guys are an anti-establishment group just trying to find the middle of the country, or maybe the middle of the donors. The donors, our beloved donors. Shut up and go do whatever you're gonna do to private equity owners. Go pleasure them in private. You're disgusting.
You don't have to tell them to go do that. They're doing that as we speak. So let's get to where the hearts and minds of American voters actually lie, because they would have you believe that, Biden and the Democrats aren't pro-corporate enough. Except, let's take a look at healthcare. In 2022, or a 2022 AP poll, Associated Press, reveals that public satisfaction with the US healthcare system is remarkably low, with fewer than half of Americans saying it is generally handled well. Only 12% say it's handled extremely or very well. But about 2/3 of adults think it is the federal government's responsibility to make sure all Americans have healthcare coverage, with adults ages 18 to 49 more likely than those over 50 to hold that view. The percentage of people who believe healthcare coverage is a government responsibility has actually risen in recent years, ticking up from 57% in 2019 to 62% in 2017.
Okay, I gotta jump in there. So if every poll shows you the same exact thing, progressive positions poll at 2/3 of the country. That's chapter 1 of my book, Justice is Coming. There's dozens of polls in there, and it doesn't matter. You don't have to worry about the book. You don't have to worry about anything. Just look at polls when they come out on policy issues going forward, and you will see that same 2/3 number comes up every time on almost every issue. Yet, there's no one in Washington that represents that 2/3.
Right.
Trump was against universal healthcare. Joe Biden is against universal healthcare. No labels is against universal healthcare. Everyone is against universal healthcare in Washington, even though 2/3 of Americans want it. Where the F are the moderates?
Let's get to taxing the rich. So a New York Times poll conducted in November of 2020 found that about 2/3 of respondents supported higher taxes on those making $400,000 or more per year.
2/3.
A Politico/Morning Consult poll released in February of 2019 showed that 3/4 of voters said that the wealthiest Americans should pay more in taxes.
76% to be exact. And that's not, hey, you shouldn't cut their taxes. That's, no, you should increase their taxes. And that's, sorry, that's not 2/3, that's 3/4. Have you heard a single person on cable news say, oh yeah, do American people want taxes increased? I've never seen it in my lifetime. Other than me when I was on cable news.
One more poll to get to, because I just like to give you guys a variety of sources to show the receipts. So about 6 in 10 adults now say that the feeling that some corporations don't pay their fair share, 61%, bothers them a lot, while a nearly identical share say this about some wealthy people not paying their fair share, 60%, according to a 2023 Pew Research Center survey. But We should listen to Joe Manchin, who argues that the country absolutely loves the tax cuts for the rich, for people like himself, and that we don't want them to pay their fair share. That's where the country is, according to Joe Manchin and No Labels and all of the billionaire funders, millionaire funders who back the organization.
And last thing is that just one of their funders, Steven Schwartzman, that they mentioned there, that runs private equity group, one of the richest men in the world, multi-billionaire. Do you think he might care about the tax cuts?
No, come on.
The tax cuts literally save him not millions, billions of dollars.
I'm sure that doesn't make a difference.
No, but out of the goodness of his heart, because he cares about the average American,
right.
The moderate American. That's why he's backing Joe Manchin, who says that even though 3/4 want tax increases on Steve Schwartzman, we should do tax cuts for Steve Schwartzman because he's the moderate. He's the moderate. So this is why people are disgusted with every institution in America. This is why they have lost faith in the media and the politicians. And we have the two most unpopular people almost in American history, political history, Joe Biden and Donald Trump running for president, and everyone's saying, you have no choice. And when you say, oh, can I have a choice? They go, Joe Manchin, which is the only person arguably worse than those two.
When we come back from the break, we're gonna get into this pretty epic profile on Chris Licht, the new head over at CNN.
All right, back on TYT, Cenk and Anna with you guys, more news.
Well, let's get to this fascinating profile on Chris Licht. The Atlantic published a lengthy, but I will admit, fascinating profile on Chris Licht. He's the relatively new head of CNN, and there's a lot to dig into. So let's get started with what motivates his vision for CNN? What's his vision in the first place? And is he succeeding in carrying it out? Spoiler alert, no, he is not succeeding. However, according to Tim Alberta, who wrote this profile in The Atlantic, he writes that when he took the helm of CNN in May of 2022, Licht had promised to reset with Republican voters and with their leader, meaning Donald Trump. He had swaggered into the job, telling his employees that the network had lost its way under the former president, Jeff Zucker, that their hostile approach to Trump had alienated a broader viewership that craved sober, fact-driven coverage. These assertions thrust Licht into a two-front war, fighting to win back Republicans who had written off the network while also fighting to win over his own journalists, many of whom believed that their new boss was scapegoating them to appease his new boss, David Zaslav, who'd hired Licht with a decree to move CNN toward the ideological center. I'm gonna pause for comment from Cenk because I know you have a lot to say about that.
Yeah, every part of this story is wrong. And it's not to say that this story is not helpful. It's actually really good journalism. He exposes what's going on behind the scenes. Is very helpful, okay? So don't get me wrong. It's just that he lives in the same bubble as everyone else in Washington. So he assumes these things that should not be assumed. So for example, Zaslav wants to move people to CNN to the ideological center. No, he doesn't. The ideological center, according to the polling, is very progressive on economic issues, right? So instead, he wants to move it to the center between the extremist Republicans and the corporate Democrats, which is actually an extremist position. There's a reason why CNN is not popular. They think, oh, if we just did objective journalism, but you never did objective journalism. You did journalism to help the status quo and to maintain corporate power. So every assumption is wrong. They're like, if we just move to the center that isn't the center, and we just represent corporations better, that'll help me with my ratings. No, and no, and no. So Chris Licht was sent on a mission that is impossible. He didn't do himself any favors with the way that he has conducted himself. But no person could do that job, and it doesn't matter because when they fire him and they put the new person in, I will guarantee you ahead of time, they will also suck in the ratings because the mission is wrong.
Also, So there are two things happening simultaneously, right? Because I remember during this era, I watched a lot of CNN. I always had it in the background as I was working on the show, just to make sure I didn't miss something that would break in the news. I literally can't even do that anymore. It's unwatchable. But back then, it was still unwatchable, but at least I had a better sense of news that was breaking as it was breaking. Now, what I noticed was they were very critical of Donald Trump, extremely critical, and everything was an emergency, everything was a disaster, everything was worth getting panicked about. But then at the same time, they went out of their way to provide jobs, contributor roles to various Trump figures, right? Corey Lewandowski is a perfect example. Corey Lewandowski was working as a contributor over at CNN as he was simultaneously working on Trump's campaign.
And by the way, that was not under Licht. That was under Zucker.
Yes, exactly.
So like, Zucker is a great guy who challenged Trump. Is he? No, he ran on what's called a swarm strategy, where they swarm around one topic. Remember the plane and they wouldn't get off the missing plane, right? So in this case, Zucker had a mandate to talk about Trump endlessly. And at the time, remember, in 2015, 2016, they were not critical. They weren't even critical. They're the patient zero in platforming Trump and making him what he is today. And that was not under Licht, that was under Zucker.
That's right.
So this apologist thing about like, Zucker was so tough on Trump. My ass he was. There's no one more responsible for Donald Trump than Jeff Zucker, who also picked him he took a failed businessman, Donald Trump, with 6 bankruptcies that he knows, and pretended he was an incredibly successful businessman on a show called The Apprentice when Zucker ran NBC. Zucker also hired Jeffrey Lord, who was a zealot right-wing lunatic, and made it seem like Trump was perfectly fine. Now he's leaking all over and trying to bury Licht. Look, I got no love for Licht. I got no love for any of these guys. But fair is fair and right is right. Zucker, who is the worst of the worst, not pretending, Licht's too nice to Trump. Please, that is an affront to the truth.
That is definitely a fair point. Now, the question is, does Licht want to coddle Republicans? He's certainly been accused of that, both externally and even internally. And here's what he had to say about that. So when he'd warned journalist Audie Cornish, during a company town hall about taking a condescending tone toward Republicans, surely it sounded to some reporters like he wanted them to coddle the crazy right-wingers who would use their platform to destabilize the country's democratic institutions. Licht looked annoyed. We are not an advocacy network. And if you want to work for an advocacy network, there are other places to go, he told me. You can find any flavor of advocacy in the news organization that suits your need. We are providing something different. And when the crap hits the fan in this world, you're not gonna have time for that advocacy anymore. You need an unbiased source of truth. That's what he argued.
See, that makes no sense. Okay, why does it make no sense? Everybody says, Licht is wrong. And then they never answer, okay, what's the correct thing to do? So let's be constructive, okay? So when you're looking for an unbiased source of news, would you go to some place that says, no, we are going to cater to Republicans and cater to Democrats in order to get neutrality and balance? No, you would not go to that place, because they're declaring to you, we're not going to be honest with you. We're just gonna appease the Republican and Democratic politicians. We're going to appease the people in power. That has nothing to do with the truth or news. No, if you want to go to a place that has unvarnished news, you would go to a place that challenges both Republicans and Democrats.
Totally agree. Yeah, that's the difference, right? But when you're in a situation where you're hyper obsessed with ratings and you're more concerned about alienating half of the country by telling the truth, well, then you're gonna engage in this like weird false equivalency coverage, which, to the credit of some reporters over at CNN, they're very concerned about, which is why they're pushing back against what Licht is trying to do. They think it's actually incredibly damaging because they don't believe that the two sides are equal in every situation, right? They want to be able, according to like my read of this story, they want to be able to call out Republicans or Donald Trump when they engage either in bad behavior, in the case of Trump, criminality. And I respect that. Yeah. But I do think that what CNN screwed up on, and Chris Licht gets to it in this next quote, is true, right? they hyperventilated about too many things and treated everything like it was an emergency. And eventually people just stopped believing CNN, right?
Yeah.
Let me give you his exact quote and then I'll go to you real quick. Licht said Trump had goaded the media into outrage porn, provoking journalists to respond with such indignation so often that audiences began to tune out. When everything is an 11 on a scale of 10, Licht said, it means that when there's something really awful happening, we're kind of numb to it. That was a strategy, and I felt like the media was falling for that strategy. What do you think about that quote, Cenk?
So that quote is true, but the problem is that it needs much more context. If you just take it by itself, then it's gonna be misleading. So here's what I mean by that. So no one hates false equivalency more than I do. I've been fighting against it for 25 years now, okay? So yes, unfortunately, on a lot of economic issues, Democrats and Republicans agree and there's theater around it, right? But they don't agree on judges. They don't agree on social issues. Every once in a while, the Democrats do something positive, like fund more IRS agents so that the rich can't cheat on their taxes, et cetera. So you have to be clear about what is true and what is not true, and put aside your partisanship. Okay. On the other hand, I have no sympathy for the CNN reporters, producers, editors, et cetera, that say like, oh, we can't do false equivalency, so we have to make sure we challenge Donald Trump. Well, that sounds like I should have a lot of sympathy for that, right? Yes, but did you ever challenge anyone else in politics?
Good point.
So did you ever challenge Joe Biden when he lied about wanting to cut Social Security 6 times? He did want to cut it 6 times, but you covered for him, right? Did you challenge Joe Biden when he had an outrageous lie about getting arrested with Nelson Mandela while protesting apartheid? I mean, if Trump had said that lie, we'd never hear the end of it.
That's true.
And we shouldn't hear the end of it. The idea of letting Trump off the hook is maddening. That is not the correct strategy. And CNN is partly doing that because of Zaslav and Malone, who runs the board, who's their biggest investor. And those guys are right wingers. And so they want to let Trump off the hook. That's not the answer. The answer is also hold other corporate politicians accountable, whether they're in the Republican or Democratic Party. But no one in the building at CNN is prepared to do that. You tell them to be aggressively challenging all those Democratic politicians, they're like, whoa, 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 whoa. No way. Now, in terms of the outrage, yes, Trump creates 1,000 outrages.
In a day.
In a day. Now, you do have to cover all those. So, but why do I agree with that quote? Because in this, MSNBC is way more guilty than CNN. Anytime like, oh, Trump's about to go to jail. Trump's about to do, oh, Trump's bad, and about everything. And so they cried so much wolf when you don't need to cry wolf. He actually is really bad. He already does 1,000 bad things. Why did you bother to embellish an extra like 50 that like, and you turn to MSNBC, they're like, Trump sneezed and his second cousin once removed is really angry about it. Like, I don't care about his cousins. I don't care. Like, this is nonsense. Focus on the policies that are killing this country. But they don't want to do that either. By the way, did MSNBC really disagree with the giant tax cuts for the rich or all the money sent to the defense contractors? Because I haven't seen a lot of segments on MSNBC complaining about the Pentagon budget.
Listen, at the end of the day, what this is really about, what his vision is, I don't even think it's ideological, okay? They need high ratings for advertising to make a profit and make their investors happy. This is for-profit media, it's a for-profit media model. Now, there's a way to implement a for-profit media model where you're not constantly hyperventilating about potentially alienating people. I think we do a good job. We're not a nonprofit. We're also not publicly traded, and I think that makes a huge difference, right? But just going back to Licht, I wanna give you one more statement from him in regard to his vision for media, but more importantly, then pivot to an example he provides for good journalism. And if you think Cenk is already animated, just wait till you see his reaction to this. Licht said he says this, if something's a lie, you can call it a lie, okay? You know what you're dealing with now. I think he changed the rules, meaning Trump, of the game, and the media was a little caught off guard and put a jersey on and got into the game as a way of dealing with it. And at least at my organization, I think we understand that jersey cannot go back on because guess what? It didn't work. Being in the game with the jersey on didn't change anyone's mind. So that's what Licht is saying in regard to CNN putting a jersey on as opponents to Donald Trump and then going at it, okay? But then he provides an example of who he thinks is a great journalist and Wait for it, wait for it. It is Jake Tapper. So the new boss told people inside CNN that Tapper's 4 o'clock show, The Lead, was the model.
I told you.
Was the model.
When he moved him to 9 o'clock, I told, and even when he first came in, I said, oh, he's gonna love Jake Tapper.
No, get a load of this. He called him tough, respectful, inquisitive.
Yeah, of course.
What?
So look, Jake Tapper is the one, all right, I don't want to get into personalities. The bottom line here is, guys, the jersey comment is more important, okay? Because they view challenging a politician as putting on a jersey. No, that's the jersey of the referees. You're supposed to do that at all turns. That's not putting on a jersey. If you don't challenge the president of the United States when Donald Trump was president, well, then you're obviously not a journalist, right? The refs, journalists are supposed to be the refs. They're supposed to challenge both sides. They're supposed to call fouls on both sides. But the reason they actually have the jersey on is because they never challenge corporate politicians. It's not just Democrats. Like, they'll challenge AOC, they'll challenge Bernie Sanders. Those are outsiders, those are rebels, anti-establishment figures. But the establishment figures, Mitch McConnell, Nancy Pelosi, Joe Biden, Joe Manchin, moderate, master legislator, amazing, wonderful. No, you're putting on a jersey there for corporate rule. And it's never mentioned in any of these stories.
Right.
Because they all assume it. You ask them, hey, you ask a fish, how's the water? They say, what water? And that's like Tim Alberta does a really interesting, good piece of journalism. But to even him, if you asked him, he would have said, what water?
Look, I have a theory on why that is, right? Because if you look at the media today, I would say the bulk of the coverage tends to focus on the very shallow differences between Democrats and Republicans, and those tend to be culture war issues. Let's just keep it real, culture war issues or manufactured conflicts about legislation like the debt ceiling bill. Let's keep it real. Corporate Democrats and corporate Republicans were in cahoots the whole time. They both loved what the end result of that legislation was. They wanted to cut spending that impacts positively ordinary people and continue increasing spending on things like defense. That's exactly what they did. They're in cahoots. When it comes to those issues, there's virtually no difference between corporate Democrats and corporate Republicans. The only way they differentiate themselves is through manufactured culture wars, and that is what the media takes their lead, and that is what the media covers. So there's this like lie about how different both parties are, and it's like, ooh, are you rooting for blue or are you rooting for red? It's just, and that's what's missing from it, Cenk. That's why there's no mention of corporate power in this piece. That's why there's no distinction between Democrats and Republicans, blue versus red when it comes to corporate issues. That's why there's no mention of corporate money. That is not even in the mainstream media's consciousness, and that is a problem.
It's a giant, like, iceberg of a problem. So look, you'll see in the article things that show you what the problem is, but he never explains it because he doesn't know it himself. So like, for example, he'll talk about, oh, well, they need access to Republicans. Wait, why? Why do they need access to Republicans? Why does a journalist, if you want to get good sources of information, okay, fair, right? But if you want to put them on television for your ratings, and so you're gonna sell out the truth by appeasing them to put them on air, as they did with Trump in the town hall, but as they do with every politician in every instance, well, you're not really doing journalism. You're just doing access to power. But no one mentions that because it's too uncomfortable, because that's what they all do. And then one other word that's like a key word in the article, and you'll see throughout in all of this coverage, is tone. Well, what should the tone be? The tone should be respectful of politicians. Why? The press is supposed to be the fourth estate. They're supposed to challenge the powerful. They're supposed to challenge the government. But everyone, including the good guys, assume, no, their job is to kiss as much ass as humanly possible. And so we're having a debate about whether Chris Licht kissed enough ass and the right ass. The whole debate is wrong.
Yeah, I mean, journalists are supposed to be muckrakers. They're supposed to rake the muck. Instead, they engage in the mucky behavior themselves, and that's the huge problem that has led to a huge portion of the American public just rejecting and failing to believe in our institutions. And I don't blame them for that, given what the press has turned into. Believe it or not, we're not done with that story. There are other elements to it, spicier elements to get into, including the firing of Don Lemon. We'll get into that when we come back from the break. See you then.
Thank Thanks for listening to the full episode of The Young Turks. Support our work, listen ad-free, access members-only bonus content, and more by subscribing to Apple Podcasts at apple.co/TYT. I'm your host, Cenk Uygur, and I'll see you soon.